In this video, we will explore HTML form elements. Form elements are essential for building interactive web interfaces. We will cover input types, select menus, text areas, buttons, and other form controls that allow users to interact with the website. So let us begin. The form element is the container for all form controls. Forms collect user input and send data to servers. The action attribute specifies where to send the data, which is typically a server-side script that will process the information. The method attribute defines how to send it, usually using get or post methods. Each form control should have a unique name attribute. Here is an example of a basic form structure. The code begins with a form tag. It includes attributes such as action, which specifies the server endpoint to handle the form submission, and method, which defines how the data is sent, in this case, post. Within the form there are labels and input fields for username and password, each with corresponding for and ID attributes. Finally, there is a submit button to submit the form. Let's explore the different types of text input available in HTML forms. First, we have the text input. This is a standard single-line text input for general text entry, such as usernames or search terms. Here's an example of how to implement a text input. Next is the password input. This masks input characters, which is typically represented by dots, for sensitive information entry. Here is an example of the code. Next is the email input. This validates the email format and provides an appropriate keyboard on mobile devices. Here is an example of the code. And finally, we have the URL input, which validates the URL format and optimizes the keyboard for web address entry. Here is an example of the code. In this section, let's explore the various numeric input types available in HTML forms. First, we have the number input. This is designed for numeric values with optional minimum, maximum constraints, and step increments, such as specifying the quantity of an item. Here's an example of how to implement it. Next, we have the range input, which provides a slider control for selecting a value from a range. Here is an example of the code. Next is the date input. This provides a calendar control for selecting dates. Here is an example of the code. Finally, we have the time input, which provides a control for entering a specific time. Here is an example of the code. Now let's learn about selection controls, which are form elements that allow users to select from predefined options. First, we have the checkbox. This allows multiple selections from a group of options, such as selecting multiple interests. Next, we have the radio button, which allows only one selection from a group of options, such as selecting a gender. Next, we have the select dropdown, which provides a space-efficient menu for selecting from a list, such as selecting a country. And finally, we have the multiple select, which allows multiple selections from a drop-down list. Here is an example showing how to implement checkboxes, radio buttons, and select drop-downs. Let's take a look at text areas and file inputs, which are essential components of HTML forms. First, we have the text area, which provides a multi-line text input field for longer text content. Text areas are resizable by default, although this can be controlled with CSS. It supports multiple lines of text and are ideal for comments, messages, and descriptions. Here is an example of the code. Next, we have the file input, which allows users to upload files from their device. You can restrict file types with the accept attribute, enable multiple file selection with the multiple attribute, and requires ink type equals multi-part form data on the form. Here is an example of the code. In this section, let's explore the different types of buttons available in HTML forms. First, we have the submit button, which submits the form data to the server. This is the default button type if not specified. Here are two ways to implement it. Next, we have the reset button, which resets all form controls to their initial values. Here are two ways to implement it. Next, we have the button type, which is a generic button with no default behavior, and is used with JavaScript for custom functionality. Here is an example of the code. And finally, we have the image button, which is a submit button with a custom image instead of text. Here is an example of the code. Let's explore some of the key attributes that control form behavior and validation. First, we have the action attribute, which specifies the URL where the form data is submitted. Next, we have the method attribute, which specifies the HTTP method used for submission, either GET or POST. Next, we have the encryption type attribute, which specifies how form data is encoded when submitted. Next, we have the autocomplete attribute, which enables or disables browser autocomplete. Next, we have the noValidate attribute, which disables the browser's built-in validation. And finally, we have the target attribute, which specifies where to display the response. Here is an example of the code showing how to implement these attributes. In this section, let's explore some of the most common input attributes. First, we have the required attribute, which specifies that an input field must be filled out before submitting the form. Here is an example of the code. Next, we have the placeholder attribute, which provides a hint that describes the expected value of an input field. Here is an example of the code. Next, we have the disabled attribute, which specifies that an input field should be disabled, meaning not editable. Here is an example of the code. And finally, we have the pattern attribute, which specifies a regular expression that the input's value must match. Here is an example of the code. Here are some best practices for form design. Always use labels. Associate labels with form controls using the for attribute to improve accessibility and usability. Make sure to use mobile-friendly inputs. Use appropriate input types, such as email, telephone, and date, to trigger optimized mobile keyboards. You should also provide clear validation. Show helpful error messages and use HTML5 validation attributes, such as required and pattern. You must also ensure accessibility. Use ARIA attributes, proper focus states, and ensure keyboard navigation works properly. Be sure to group related fields together. Use field set and legend elements to group related form controls for better organization. And finally, implement security measures. Use HTTPS, implement cross-site request forgery protection, and validate data on both client and server sides. Remember, well-designed forms lead to better user experience and higher conversion rates. If you like this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. Visit codelucky.com for more such useful content.